Yeah, so my name is Yasmin Omar. I grew up in West London, and when I graduated university, I started to work with children on the periphery of school exclusions. And having worked in that role for 2 years, it then inspired me to go into teaching because I had a science degree, and I thought, you know what, I could actually make a difference for pupils whilst working inside of schools as opposed to just outside of them. So I applied for a PGCE. I went to the Institute of Education, and about 2 months in, I ended up going blind overnight in my right eye. And I actually went to Specsavers. I didn't know how serious it was because I didn't go blind straight away. And I went to Specsavers and they told me this is really serious. You need to go to an eye hospital. So I did, and very quickly discovered that it was a condition called optic neuritis, which is usually associated with multiple sclerosis. Now, at the time, I didn't know anybody that had MS, didn't have a family history of it, was, really surprised. And over the course of my PGCE year that year, I had maybe 50 hospital visits, appointments, GP, just alongside my placements. And at the end, actually, just a week before I got my QTS, I ended up getting a confirmed MS diagnosis. And at this point, I'd already had an NQT position. I was moving to the other end of London. I was moving to Newham, and I wasn't sure what to do. I had a lot of discussions with my tutor at the Institute of Education. And, she, as anyone would say, she said, go for it, just try your best. And, I did really believe. I had Googled multiple sclerosis, and I did discover when I Googled it that it was one of the unique conditions, along with HIV and cancer, that are covered by the Equality Act straight away. And, it was something where I went into my NQT position feeling really protected by the law. Essentially, that was actually what encouraged me to continue and join my school. So on my first day of my NQT position, I'd already told them before I joined that I had MS, and there wasn't really a response. They said, we look forward to seeing you in September, but I wasn't sent to occupational health. And because it was my first role, I didn't really know what I was supposed to do or what was supposed to happen. I had nothing really to compare it to. I'd never had MS before, and I'd never been a teacher before. So, and I didn't know anybody that had both of those things. So I just kind of went with it. And from my first day, I needed to leave for a hospital appointment on the other end of London in Hammersmith. And I told everyone. I told my head of department, I told my NQT mentor, I told my line managers. I'd spoken to a lot of people, and essentially they didn't let me leave early. And I remember he came up really close to me, one of the assistant heads, and he sort of whispered to me in his office, and he said, you need to think really carefully about whether or not you want MS on your record. And it really scared me. I suddenly, I'd been there for maybe 5 hours and already felt like, maybe this was a mistake. I need to get out of here as quickly as I can. But I was at a point where I hadn't really reconciled having MS as part of my identity. It was really hard for me to make decisions based on having MS because it wasn't something I, identified with at that time. So, I continued. I came in for the rest of the week, and later that week, because of, I think, the stress, I ended up again developing optic neuritis, except this time it was in my other eye. And because it wasn't the first time I had it, I knew straight away. I was in school, whenever I'd turn a corner, I'd feel a bit dizzy and a bit off kilter. And I could tell that it was, starting to flare up. And I actually waited until the weekend. I came into school every day that week. I waited until the weekend to go to an eye hospital. And it was there at the eye hospital that they told me, you have optic neuritis. Here are some steroids. You need to stay at home for 5 days. And on maybe my first day at home from school, I got an email essentially with, a letter on headed paper that basically said, you've triggered a stage 1 because of your absences and you need to come in on Wednesday for a meeting. And it really scared me. I remember
this was the second week of your appointment.
School, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I've been in school. So I remember I started on a Monday. This was the Monday after. So I'd only really been in the school for a week at this point when I was already on a stage 1, and it was my first absence. So I missed 2 days, and because I saw that letter, I got really scared, and I came back in on the Wednesday, even though I'd been advised to stay at home for 5 days by a doctor. And, I knew I hadn't recovered. I had quite limited peripheral vision. I couldn't see properly, but I still came into school, and I told them, I remember I had a back to work meeting with an assistant head. And I told her, I remember telling her in that meeting, I've got limited peripheral vision. And it was something actually that the judge in the tribunal pointed out that I had said, you know, I've got limited peripheral vision. I can't see properly. And there was no question about whether I was fit to be at work. And it was after that, that the next day that I then had a stage 1 meeting, so quite a formal meeting with the vice principal of the school. And I remember telling him in detail about, you know, optic neuritis and my MS diagnosis and why I was off school. And he ended up writing meeting minutes where he'd essentially lied about me and said that I told him I had an eye infection, because of course an eye infection is not a disability. It's not covered by the Equality Act. You know, it's not something that requires reasonable adjustment. And that's not what I said. And essentially it was my word against his. And just very quickly, I remember feeling quite demoralized and starting to quickly realize that although the law did exist to protect me, what people do on a day-to-day basis in these individual institutions was kind of under the radar. And then the next incident I remember having was asking my line manager, the one that had told me to think carefully about whether I wanted MS on my record. I asked him if she could take me off break duty, and I explained, you know, I've got nerve damage in my eyes when it's really cold outside, and, you know, it's really hard for me to warm up. And when I'm outside, even if I'm in a coat, you know, my hands, like the extremities of my body, get really stiff in the cold. I told him that I had painful pins and needles in my feet and, you know, just a lot of fatigue, and I really needed those 20 minutes. And I remember he just turned around and said, you know, if you're unfit to do break duty, then the next question is, are you unfit to teach? And I told him then and there, you know, that I was really offended. And by the way, it was Wellbeing Week. And the only reason why he was in my classroom was because he came to tell me that he'd left chocolate in my pigeonhole for well-being. So, you know, it's something I always think about and remember. I'm in my 4th year of teaching, and I do always remember that and think, you know, how funny that he'd come to tell me he'd left chocolate for me in my pigeonhole, but then would also harass me about my disability. So after that, I went and asked the vice principal, and again, they said they don't see it as a reasonable adjustment. They said that's not a reasonable request. It's part of your conditions, you know, part of being a teacher. I remember they mentioned something about the teacher standards, you know, just kind of like wider participation and just all of this stuff. And at the same time, I was Googling, you know, reasonable adjustments. I was trying to understand the Equality Act, and my understanding of it was very different to theirs. And because I was, I guess, so new to teaching and so new to having a disability, I wasn't sure, because, you know, I felt like they were gaslighting me. And I would read something and I think, yeah, you know, this is something I think I can go to school and explain this in my own words. But then they'd, you know, hit back at me. And I think, you know, these are members of staff that have, you know, they've been in teaching longer than I've even lived, you know. So I would sometimes think, you know, maybe it's me that's wrong. So I would back down a lot.
Did you were you in the trade union at that time, or did you contact them?
Yeah, so I joined the NEU in my PGCE year. And yeah, so at this point, my contract had been renewed as an NQT, and I was starting to get in contact with them. I spoke to someone locally in the Newham area, but I used to speak to them sporadically at this point, because things at my school would move so quickly that sometimes I wouldn't even get the chance to speak to a union rep. So, and because obviously they have a lot of cases as well that they're dealing with, sometimes whilst I'd be waiting for them to get back, so much would happen, so much would escalate in the space of a week that, you know, by the time I get to speak to them again, I would have had to have done so much on my own already, because I was in school every day. And then I remember just the combined stress of it all, and also knowing that I had another appointment coming up at the hospital, I just didn't want to risk, I remember I didn't want to risk going into school. I didn't want to risk having to ask again for an absence since they denied it on my first day in September. And I think just the combined stress of that, because MS is a condition that can be exacerbated by stress. I just remember going to sleep on a Sunday night, and I just woke up really ill on the Monday. I had like a bit of a flare up. My MS symptoms were really flaring up, so I didn't go into school. So it's just, you know, a combination of knowing I had that hospital appointment and feeling really unwell that day. I just decided to not go in. And I remember whilst I was at my hospital appointment, I got a letter for a stage 2 meeting. So this was the second half term. So in like the entire autumn term, I only missed 3 days of school. But, you know, this was my second absence for an MS related reason. And I was already on a stage 2. And, you know, at this point, the letter's already saying, you know, you can be moved on to a stage 3, which is a dismissal and just loads of stuff. And I just remember I was really upset at the hospital. I remember crying. I remember trying to explain to the doctors that, I didn't even feel like I had the time to kind of even accept my MS diagnosis because I was so busy at school, and I just felt like I was being mistreated. And I remember emailing back saying I want this meeting to be postponed, because I was trying to get into contact with a trade union representative to attend with me, and B, because I felt quite unwell already. I didn't want to have a meeting at a time where I didn't really feel well enough to be in one, and I just wanted the time to kind of prepare. And I did explain. I remember saying I feel quite distressed and I feel quite unwell, so I would like for this to be postponed. I didn't mention that I was trying to get a trade union representative. And I just remember coming back into school the next day and just being ambushed really by so many different members of the SLT. I remember an assistant principal coming up to me and saying, meet me outside my office. So I was walking to her office and then she just disappeared.
Did they at any time say you're entitled to have a union rep or a friend with you?
It says it in the letter.
The letter they sent you.
It says it in the letter, but the school had a culture where, I was told from the start of my time there, don't bother getting a union rep. Don't ever be absent. We always talk about people that are absent. We hate it. Just the kind of conversations people would have in the science office. And I was aware of those things. I had really great relationships with a lot of staff there, and they would tell me that don't ever tell them that you're part of the union. Don't ever mention that you're getting advice from the union. You're going to get in trouble. It was something everyone was really scared of. So I would never mention, the union. And I just remember trying to follow this assistant principal to her office, but as I was walking behind her, she just kind of turned the corner in the opposite direction and she disappeared, and I didn't know where she went. So I went to her office and I stood outside. The door's locked. I was just really confused. So she just picked me up and said, come with me to my office.
The thing was, I went outside her office. I got a call from another senior member of staff, and I was invited into another meeting where a vice principal, an assistant head, and my head of department were sat there. And I remember the first question I was asked was, have you asked to postpone the meeting because you're planning to involve a trade union representative? And I got really scared. I just said, no, that's not why I've asked to postpone the meeting. And they said, well, then what's the issue with having the meeting now? So not only was, the meeting not postponed, they actually ended up bringing it forward to the minute I returned to school. And I remember after that, I decided to resign. I said that I basically explained that to the head teacher in a 3-page letter. I explained that, I have MS, that I know my rights, that I'd Googled them, and that I didn't feel like I was being treated in an appropriate way by my line managers. And I told him that it's contributed to my reason for resigning. And he called me into a meeting, which I thought was an exit interview, because the school didn't really have a notice period. If you wanted to leave, you would kind of leave the day that you resign, as opposed to wait until, the end of that half term or that term. So I thought, that this was an exit meeting, and I told him, I said, I told him about the comment that the line manager had made to me about, being unfit to do break duty, meaning that I'm unfit to teach and that kind of stuff. And, he basically somewhat apologized and said it wasn't appropriate for them to have talked to me in that way. And he asked me to take a special leave and return to the school in January. And so that's what I did. Because I wanted to get a better handle on my health. He knew that I was leaving because of my MS and feeling mistreated because of just my MS, nothing else. So I was given that special leave. But when I came back in January, it was a lot worse. I remember initially they promised me a phased return. They cancelled it as soon as I came back. So about an hour or two into the school day, they said, oh, we made a mistake. Actually, you don't have a phased return. And it was a big part of why I was returning in the first place. And from then, they did the classic, I started to get observed 24/7. Honestly, I remember sometimes I was an NQT. I was under the impression that I'd be observed once every single half term, which would take it up to 6 observations a year. But there was a point, I remember in that January to February half term, where they would observe me sometimes every single day of the week, and they were all unannounced formal observations. I would just always have SLT in my lessons, and I would never know, when they're going to show up. And, sometimes I was so scared that sometimes I remember I just wanted to lock the door, and obviously I didn't, because I've got 30 children in there. That's a huge hazard. I can't just lock my classroom door, but I just wanted to, because I never felt like I was giving the children 100% attention because I was so scared of what was going to happen to me. And, you know, just the stress of that. In my first week back, I ended up having quite a severe MS relapse. It's the most severe that I've had to this day. I woke up one day and I just couldn't feel anything from, like, if I put my hand on my left hip, I just couldn't feel anything from my hip down, right the way down to my toes. And I began to walk with crutches, and not a single member of, you know, the line management structure, they could all see that I was, you know, hobbling around school in crutches, and not once didn't ask me, you know, are you okay? What's happened? I told them all that I'd had a relapse. I'd mentioned it in the office. The pupils would talk about it a lot. None of them asked me. I remember I used to teach on 2 different floors, and my tutor room was up maybe 3 or 4 flights of stairs, and they would watch me just struggle to get up the stairs.
There's no lift.
They never didn't. So about 2 weeks in, I asked for a lift key because I got to a point where I just felt so embarrassed. You know, I felt like I was constantly holding people up. I was just in everyone's way all the time because I could only go up the stairs 1 step at a time, and it would just take forever. I ended up asking for a lift key. I didn't ask my head of department, and I didn't ask the assistant principal that line managed our faculty because, you know, they had been ignoring me that entire time. So I asked the deputy head, and he gave me the lift key and then told me off and said, you know, but you've skipped like 3 levels of line management. You know, I'm not the person you should be asking for a lift key. And I tried to explain that it was because, you know, no one was responding to me. But, you know, in the end, I just had to apologize essentially for asking for that lift key. And it was extremely difficult time. And, you know, whilst on crutches, I remember I'd be observed and I'd be criticized for not circulating the room enough. You know, I was trying my best. I was always stood up in lessons. There was no mention of my MS in my formal observations, you know, just constant criticism. And in the end, I remember I just somehow managed to get to the February half term, and I sent a really long email, I remember, by then we had a new acting head of department because our previous one had left, and the assistant head. And I essentially explained, you know, I'm on the brink of giving up. My MS has gotten really bad. I've got so many new lesions on my brain and spine. You know, I can't even walk properly. I don't know what to do. Can I have a reduced timetable, and can I have some support? And I said that on the last Sunday of the February half term because I wasn't willing to go back to school if I didn't know that they were going to help me make it to the end of my NQT year. And the response was actually that the assistant head said that he'd not seen it. And then I was in the middle of teaching a lesson one day. They interrupted me in the middle of a lesson and said, you need to go up and see the deputy heads of school right now. And I thought the only thing that could be this urgent has to be my health. And I remember leaving to go to that meeting, literally left the lesson, went up to the meeting, and he turned around and said, we've got serious concerns about your performance as a teacher, so you're going on a capability procedure. That's all he said. And I was really shocked, really shocked. And I remember saying to him, you know, am I not going to get a response to my email? And, you know, he kept saying, you know, sickness and capability are separate policies. I remember he put his hands up and he was like, you know, sickness and capability are separate policies. Take that up with, you know, the teaching and learning assistant principal if that's something you want to discuss, or take it up with the people line managing your faculty. I'm here to discuss your capability. That, you know, he tried to act as if they were completely separate things. And I just didn't come back to school after that. I was on sick leave. Because of the union, I ended up getting sent to occupational health, and straight away they said I was unfit for work, and I never actually returned until I resigned 6 months later. But you know, it was the worst experience.
Okay, so how did you resolve all of this? You went to union supported you go to industrial tribunal, did they?
Yep. So I did Google discrimination, and it seemed to me as though what happened was discrimination. However, I wasn't sure to what extent. Obviously, passed it on to the union straight away. They picked it up for me. They used to advocate on my behalf. I didn't have to be in direct contact with the school anymore after that day. And it took it took about 3 school years, but eventually, you know, all I did. So what I had been doing in my whole time employed there, I had been forwarding my emails, all of my emails, to my personal email, just because I didn't know. I knew there was no notice period. I knew that I was very unwell and had unpredictable health. And I just remember thinking, well, I might need to access these emails one day. Yes. So I want to keep a record of everything that's happened. I didn't know, thank you. I didn't know enough about the law to know what is important, what isn't. So I just forwarded all of them.
So at the end, you were off sick for some months. Did you did you go for a job in another school, or what happened?
So, after that, I just remember feeling as though MS and teaching just aren't compatible. I honestly just thought it's not possible to have MS that's stable and, work in a school, because I had to relearn to walk and everything in that year, so I quit teaching essentially, and I decided that I was going to go back to my pastoral roots, because I'd been working in exclusions before and things like that. I was still interested in education. I just didn't think that I was capable of being a classroom teacher. So I was looking for a role, a non-teaching role in a school where I could do something kind of pastoral. And I ended up applying to another school in Newham, and for a non-teaching role. And when I applied for that role, they asked me in interview, how come you're a qualified science teacher? It says here that you did a PGCE at the IOE. What happened, if you don't mind sharing? And I essentially, everyone had said to me, don't say anything, it's unprofessional, to mention health or tribunals in, an interview. But I honestly couldn't help myself. I just wanted to be honest. And I said, I've got a tribunal with my previous school. I'm a person with MS, and I was mistreated, in my opinion. And because of that, I've quit teaching, and I can't get a reference for the teaching that I did. I essentially left on capability. And I remember they called me when I got home, and they said, we'll offer you either the job that you applied for, or a full-time teaching post without having to do another interview. And it genuinely meant so much to me. And they employed me without having to do a lesson. I wasn't observed in a lesson. I didn't have to do another interview, and I didn't get a reference. And they believed me, and they gave me that job. And I've been there now for I'm in my third school year there, and I've been in remission the entire time. I've never had any MS symptoms since.
Are they making any reasonable adjustments for you there?
So they showed me how to access the lift from my first day. I remember that. I wasn't on break duty, so they sent me to occupational health before they even let me come into the school building, which to me was a huge difference. So I had that occupational health referral, and from that they were instructed, it recommended they don't put me on any duties, and they adhered to that straight away. I was taken off any rotas. I had access to the lift, and that's all I really needed at this point, because I was on I was in complete remission. And also to be teaching in one classroom, that's another adjustment that was made for me. Obviously things changed because of COVID, but at that point I was fit and healthy enough to be able to keep up with that. But it's not even just that for me, it's the fact that they've created a culture for me where if I do have any issues, I do feel like I can speak to the SLT straight away. And sometimes I do get hospital appointments on really short notice, and I'm not made to go through this really bureaucratic process. I just have to fill out a form and it gets approved straight away, no questions asked. And that for me has made a huge difference to helping my health stay stable.
So what would your advice be to another young teacher who's got a hidden condition like yours, but it can be pushed into crisis by stress and management, treatment and so on? What would your advice be looking back on the last 4 or 5 years? What should they do?
Well, my advice certainly would be to, utilize Google. First of all, I learned a lot about the Equality Act just by Googling it. There are so many different, organizations that have put up really useful information about medical conditions all over the internet. And that's something that I used. I would strongly advise that, they're part of a union. I think having someone advocate for me when I was at my lowest in terms of my health and my well-being made a huge difference for me, and it helped me feel validated. And also for people to keep, evidence, because you never know if you might need it in future, if you have been a victim of discrimination, to keep as much evidence as you can. And like contemporaneous records about what's happening, keep records, whether it's a journal, whether it's emailing yourself, just keep a record of what you're thinking and feeling and what's happening around you. And finally, to try to advocate for yourself also, whether that's to speak to someone in your school, whether that's your immediate line manager in your faculty, whether that's another member of staff. And if there is a union in your school as well, to utilize that union in your school. I think if you feel that you're being mistreated, it's important to not feel as though, or to not doubt yourself and your perception, because ultimately you're the one with a condition that can be exacerbated by stress. And if something is stressing you out, it's not for anyone else to decide, the impact something is having on you, and to just not fear standing up for yourself, essentially.
Okay, now obviously that's what you would say to another young teacher. What about, why do you think it's important that people like you are teaching science in our secondary schools in London now? What benefits are there to pupils from you being there?
Well, I mean, I would say every single school has, a pupil with a disability or a pupil with a learning need. And I think that, looking back at my time at school, I don't remember having any teachers who had medical conditions I was aware of, at least. And I'm sure there were teachers that did have conditions. I feel it makes a huge difference to have representation. I think it's really important. We don't know if any of the children we teach will go on to have neurodegenerative conditions in the future. And even if they don't, it's really important representation to teach pupils that people with disabilities or with a neurodegenerative condition like mine can, work full time, can be a teacher, can be there, and, just be an example and a role model to children, whether they have a disability or not. I think that there's a lot of misconception around hidden impairments, as you were saying. And, it makes a huge difference when there is someone in front of you who has such a condition, because it can educate everyone, and it can, kind of dispel myths and also get rid of misconceptions that exist, on a widespread level in society.
And do you think, as a science teacher, that it gives you an in to actually explain the body systems and when things don't work as they should? Is that so you can be your own teaching aid, really, to talk?
Absolutely. I mean, I do teach, there's a topic called B10 in biology, which is essentially called the nervous system. And it is genuinely my favorite topic to teach. I have so much I can say about the nervous system. I do show pupils loads of random things like, I've got residual nerve damage in my eyes. If you shine a light in your pupil, it's meant to constrict immediately. However, mine doesn't, because of that prior nerve damage. And I do show them, and it's something children find fascinating, like, wow, are you an alien? They ask you loads of random things, but they come from a genuine place. And it's something memorable. And I think it's important